Today is the 9th of December 2019. We are here at the University of Maryland, College Park, Maryland, for the Speak Your Truth oral history recording. My name is Sonja Hamilton, and I'm here today with Mr. Aaron Wilson. Good evening, Mr. Wilson, and how are you today?
I'm well. How are you doing, Sonja?
I'm doing well. We are honored here to have you today with us as we unpack your knowledge about the city of Fairmount Heights. So to begin our interview, we're just gonna go through some basic questions. Your biographical questions. So first off, we'll start off, with what is your full name?
My full name is Aaron Maurice Wilson.
Okay. And where were you born?
I was born in Washington, D.C.
D.C. And did you also grow up in that area, or did you move?
More so grew up in Forestville initially when when I was born, my parents lived in Forestville. And then about age 7, I moved into the town of Fairmount Heights, and I lived there until 2011. Well, no, that's incorrect. 2013.
Okay. And so your family was originally from DC?
My father and them were originally from DC. My father was born in DC. My mother grew up in Cincinnati. They met in Texas in college, and they ended up coming back to settle here in DC.
DC. Okay, so does your family have any ties, with the South and then moving up to the North, or from your knowledge, everybody was just from DC?
Let's see. If we go deep into the family history, my father's side of the family initially came from Charles County, Bryantown, Maryland. Actually, in fact, my great great grandparents owned property right across the field from Dr. Samuel Mudd. So if you know Samuel Mudd, the history with John Wilkes Booth, yes, that's kind of, it has some intertwinings in the family history, but not too deep. In fact, my great grandparents are very right beside Samuel Mudd to be precise.
Oh.
I'm sorry to drop. I know I dropped. There's a lot of stuff offhand, but so that's that portion. So there's Maryland for my father's mother. That's South Carolina. We're talking Orangeburg, South Carolina. A family that initially had at the end of slavery, about 13 kids.
Oh wow.
13 kids that initially all migrated up to the DC area.
DC area.
And then for my mother's side, all of them have originated from that portion of South Carolina near around Georgia.
Georgia.
Yeah.
Okay. So, have you always lived in the DC, Maryland area, or have you lived elsewhere?
My entire life, I've lived here in the
In
DC, Maryland area.
Okay. So, just to state for the record, what career slash industry do you work in?
I work here at the University of Maryland in the University Libraries. My official title is Database Editor and Copy Cataloger for the library system. So I work more so with cataloging and database management regarding our online library, interlibrary, was it not interlibrary, integrated library system.
Okay.
So I'm managing any type of changes that may have to come to it, whether things are withdrawn, come in, oh, that's not the right call number, you have to fix it.
Fix it.
Yeah.
Okay. So, so I did a little, history, a little read up
All right.
on you, and what I gathered was that not only your current job, but in the past, you worked at the Library of Congress, Bowie State University, Howard University, the United States Government Publishing Offices, Federal Depository Library Program, and George Mason University.
Yes.
So did you do the same type of job at all these areas, or was it different?
Each one, well, more so they were a little bit similar, but I mean they had certain things that were different. A vast majority of my work has been in technical services, so more so cataloging and acquisition portions of library service. Now, going back to undergrad, working in the undergrad library, we were exposed to working front desk, reference, acquisitions, cataloging, the whole gamut. And it was a small library. We only had 2 librarians.
Oh wow.
So you had student workers doing some of the library work. Yep.
Okay. Okay, so just to ask you more community and local questions,
Sure.
you answered the first one, how long you lived in Fairmount Heights. So I just want to ask you, like, what was it like? Could you describe, like, from your earliest memories? You said you moved there when you were 8?
About 7, 8 years old.
7, 8 years. So what was it like for you?
Let's see. We moved here February. I can remember February of 1993. I was still going to elementary school at Berkshire in Forestville. And then we moved into the house. It was a very tight knit community, and even to this day, it still is. But growing up, it was a tight knit community even then. And you had a lot of newer families that were moving into the community, a lot of older families that had their children that were now retirees that were living in the community. And what was very, I think, I look back on it and I smile about it, is that the community, the neighbors that I had living around me, we all knew each other. They knew um, my family, even though they had moved into the town in 1993, they had some roots in the town, dating back to my father's mother going to church in the community. They went to church at Grace United Methodist, which was 2 blocks away from my home. In fact, from my home, I could see the church that still the church that still stands. So they had very deep roots with people in the community. They went to church with them, and in fact, our two of our neighbors, actually 4 of our neighbors, they all knew my grandmother. And so when they knew that it was her son moving, they were like, "Oh yeah, you're
Part of the family.
part of the family." So they would really look out for my sisters and I. And I am the youngest of three.
Three.
I have an older sister and I have a twin sister.
Oh,
So
that's nice.
they would look out for us, and it was just a really nice. It has always been a really nice community to live in.
Okay. So would you say that the community had a strong religious faith, or like?
I would say so.
You
If I
say
mean,
so?
and you can look into the history of the town when the churches were established in the community. I mean, and I know I'm kind of segueing off. I mean,
No, you're
orig-
leading right into
oh,
my next
I'm leaving.
question. Yeah, so that's actually
Um,
good.
it was a very there was a strong religious presence back then, and even when I was a child. I mean, you look at the history of the community when it was being established. There were actually 4 prominent churches that were in the community that prior to the town being incorporated in 1935. You had the first church was First Presbyterian of Fairmount Heights, which later moved to D.C. and became Sergeant Memorial on Nanny Hill and Burroughs in D.C. You had Grace United Methodist, which was known initially as Fairmount Heights Methodist Episcopal. This was before the big merger of the Methodist Episcopal Church and the United Methodist Church that happened. So there's Grace United Methodist, which has since closed its doors. You had First Baptist Church of Fairmount Heights, which was located on, I believe, 58th Avenue. And that one, again, still going. This is the oldest one that's still going on. In fact, the second minister was actually one of my neighbors.
Oh wow! Right there next to each other.
Right next to us, and then you had Sylvan Vista, which was located on the other side of Addison Road, which is this third, which is now the second oldest church, which really was a pillar of that portion. In fact, there is somewhere in history that there was a meeting that was being held for one of the neighboring communities that had Eleanor Roosevelt speaking at Sylvan Vista. So Sylvan Vista is still a very active church. So yeah, it's a very, I won't say uber religious, but it is a community that still has a lot of people who are very religious minded and religious hearted. I mean, you have those churches and you have the neighboring churches in the community like Addison Chapel, which was Episcopal church, and then Incarnation Catholic Church, which is on Eastern Avenue, which I initially grew up in.
Okay.
Which were very big pillars of religious influence in Fairmount Heights, and still are to some extent today.
Okay, so now that you've shared a little bit of the religious history of your community, Fairmount Heights, is there anything unique history-wise that our listeners should know about Fairmount Heights?
Where do I start? um, Now, as you're doing this project, you are aware that there are 4 municipalities that were established 4 African American municipalities established in Prince George's County. North Brentwood is the first. However, Fairmount Heights is the second, and the significance in my mind is that Fairmount Heights was actually a planned municipality. Most individuals aren't as familiar with that portion, and you can go back to the turn of the 20th century. About 1900 is when you started seeing the development of the town. Most people forget to realize that Prince George's County was the country. At the turn of the 20th century, Prince George's County was the country. Most what you see of Fairmount Heights, Sea Pleasant, coming up even here to College Park. This was the equivalent of going down into Waldorf and past Waldorf, like boonies, barns, and all that stuff. In fact, most of Fairmount Heights were owned by farmers. It was a farming community. And then what you then have established, so remember the Great Migration that is being occurring at the turn of the 20th century. African Americans in influx moving into the major metropolitan areas, New York, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia. A lot of them are moving into D.C. They don't want to put them into the city, so they're starting to go into the suburbs, and you're getting these big plots of land that are available to build a community. So you find around 1900 these subdivisions, which would later form the town, 7 subdivisions that would form the town. The property being acquired, property being sold for as less as 25 cents for like large acre, like maybe an acre of land. I mean that's unheard. I mean, 2019, that's unheard of.
Yes.
But these property where you can grow stuff and build nice houses. I mean, even if you go into Fairmount Heights now, you'll see some of the older homes. In fact, there's one, and I know I'm diverging off. There's one on 59th Avenue, which is a Victorian home, which is over 100 years old. It's one of the oldest ones that is still in existence and is in very good shape. Owned by one of the first city councilmen, town councilmen in the town named James Armstrong.
Yeah, I remember reading about him actually at the library.
In fact, I think at this point right now, that house is actually for sale.
Oh wow!
I mean, but the inside is still the bones of the house are very good, very good. But you have these subdivisions that are being established between 1900 and 1925, and then the town being formed. And remember, this is still the turn of the 20th century. Aspects of Jim Crow that are still present. You're talking about a town that has to really be self-sufficient.
Yes.
And you're having the town forming its own police after it's being incorporated in 1935, establishing its own police force, building its own school. As a matter of fact, with the school, the funny thing is, well, I think it's an amazing thing is the architect was a notable black architect by the name of William Sidney Pittman. He was an architect who originally was from Tuskegee Institute.
Okay.
He was married to Booker T. Washington's daughter,
yes,
Portia. So he actually had a home on Eastern Avenue.
And his father had a house right next to him. Is that correct?
I don't know if his father had the house next to him.
I knew it was like brothers, and they had
It may be, but I would have to double check. But I know he had the house on the top of the hill on Eastern Avenue, and he was one of the big socialites there. In fact, he was the one that initially built the first school in Fairmount Heights, which is still standing, located at the corner of 61st Avenue and Addison Road. And that's the precursor for the Fairmount Heights schools that have gone on before that. Then you have a gentleman by the name of Pickney, who was actually the chief steward to Teddy Roosevelt, who lived in the town. He lived on what is now 60th Place, and his house is still there as well. So you have a lot of in the community, a lot of noble people who, I mean, these are normal. You have your working class, but you have people who actually have provided very significant contributions to the history of the county. Doswell Brooks, who was not only a mayor but was the head of the supervisor for the color division for the county schools. So you're surprised when you really look into the history how many people
Yeah, of great significance that
have
ties to that community.
some of the first one of the first black judges in the county lived in Fairmount
Right.
Heights. Yep. So I mean, it's very interesting when you look back on it. The contributions.
Okay. So, getting a sense of what you were saying briefly, about the history of the city of Fairmount Heights, I picked up, on, there were judges, people, architects, people who probably worked in the school division. Are there anything else that, the people did, like, in the community itself for a living?
Um, Going to the like current now, it's a plethora. I mean, you had accountants,
Okay.
architects, you had people who worked in as engineers, worked with the transit authority, a lot of educators,
So a lot of educated people.
a lot of educated people, um, a lot of people at the time when it was established were considered to be upper middle class. I mean, you're talking about a lot of the property and having their own social clubs. In fact, they actually had a dance hall called Charity Hall, located on 61st Avenue, which was actually one of their where they did a lot of their festivities. Served as a church for Grace United Methodist when it was initially being established. So I mean, it was very self-sufficient. Of course, like I said, the police force was all black,
Mm-hmm.
established by the town. The fire brigade, same
Same
diff.
thing.
Everything was really self-sufficient within the town.
Okay, so how would you say it has changed the city of Fairmount Heights over the years? Is it pretty much the same, or has it changed like drastically from what it once was?
In reference to 35, I would say 1935 going forward, it has changed. For one, it has paved streets,
Yeah.
which I
Okay.
mean, which I think a lot of people, which I was talking to one gentleman, I didn't realize the streets weren't paved until almost like the 60s or 70s, from what I was told.
Oh.
So you have small things like that, but when we're talking about the look, it's becoming a more diverse town. A lot of our older residents are transitioning. You have a lot more Hispanics that are moving into town, a lot more whites. It's becoming a very diverse town, and really because of its proximity and thinking of gentrification that is occurring, especially on the Eastern Avenue line coming into Prince George's County. Fairmont Heights, along with other municipalities like Cheverly and Sea Pleasant, are seeing a lot of these houses being bought up that were initially with current market value worth around 100,000 that are now being flipped for almost 300 because of just the proximity. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's a very good location when you think about it, and a lot of people are wanting that flexibility to be outside the city but close enough to the
As a
city,
city.
and that property value is low enough that you can afford taxes and such. So you're seeing a higher influx of people who are now coming in. Um, I see it as a good thing in the sense that it's causing people not only to know more about the town, but to really understand what the history of the town is.
Honest. Okay, so you see it not with the history being lost, but with it being more brought to light, with people
It's
kind of.
it's being brought to light to some extent. I will admit, as some of our more seasoned generations are dying off, it is beginning to be lost. So things like this oral history play a vital role in making sure the history is preserved. Um, I mean, it kind of depends on where you look at it. It is not being lost with a lot of people now looking more into the town and understanding what has happened before.
Oh,
But those voices who have the firsthand knowledge, those primary sources, that's where a lot of the hidden gems in regards to what the town has really been. That's what's truly being lost in my eyes.
okay. So, I think you probably mentioned it, but just to make it, also clear for our listeners, um, who were some of the first African families, who lived in the town of
Um,
Fairmont Heights?
of course, Sidney Pittman and his wife were one of the first that initially moved into the town. You have, of course, the Pickneys that lived on 61st Avenue, who again, Mr. Pickney was a steward for President Theodore Roosevelt. You then have, let's see, I know I may have written this down. Carrie Griffin, who was a educator within the town. Um, in my notes, these many things. Those are, I mean, those are some. Cornelius Fonville, who actually was an employee not only of the Bureau of Engraving, but was a town resident, and he played a pivotal role in the town as well as a member of the city council. Doswell Brooks, as I stated, who actually still has an elementary school named after him, and I think still, who again lives in the town. So yeah, some of those were some of the first prominent people that lived in the town.
Okay, so just to you speaking about the town being, predominantly black in the day and having to be self-sufficient. Was there a community newspaper that circulated?
I'm pretty sure there was, however, I have no record of it in hand. Nothing in particular, no, that I can think of. I mean, I'm pretty sure there was, but I can't think of the actual title of the publication at this point.
Okay. And how did the town get its name?
The original subdivision that the town came about. The original subdivision that was the first subdivision that was established was Fairmount Heights. Because initially, let me see, there were the 7 subdivisions. The first one was named Fairmount Heights. The second one was named Mount Wisner, which was named after the original landowner of the property, Wisner. The third one was Bryn Mawr. There was Waterford, and there was Sylvan Vista. Is that no? Okay, yeah, that's it. Yeah. So yeah, Waterford, Sylvan Vista, Mount Wisner, North Fairmount Heights, and Bryn Mawr. So when all of them came together, they just
kind of, came to an agreement on a name.
On the name of Fairmount Heights.
Okay. So
and there's a story. Fairmount Heights with the U, not with the Farmont, like the high school. That was an accident by mistake. They forgot they actually forgot a letter. So that's why Fairmount Heights High School is spelled without the U. But it's supposed to be spelled with the U.
That's an interesting fact. Yeah. Okay, so my next question, how have historical events affected, your family and the community of Fairmount Heights? For example, the World War II, the Civil Rights Movement, school, the desegregation. Like, how has those events have an impact on the community of Fairmount Heights?
On the community, I will say, when it came to the World Wars, you had a lot of the male citizens in the town being shipped off. In fact, that's where you get the actual World War II monument in the town, because you have a lot of service that happened with male residents in the town being part of those 2 wars, as well as Vietnam. Let's see, pivotal events, like, I think for me it would be September 11th, and being alive, being in school, realizing that there was that sense of fear within the community. I mean, we were so close. You were being so close to DC. You're not sure what's going to happen. So there's that. The earthquakes that occurred in 2011. Yeah, 2011. That at that time I was on the city council. I had been elected, which I shake my head at the thought. I was in my 20s, like 23, 25. I said, let me just go for city council. I'm gonna run to see what happens. I ran. I won. Mm-hmm. I was in the midst of my senior thesis.
Yeah, that was actually a question I wanted to ask you, because I was just amazed on how a senior at university,
Yeah,
gets elected
I was
city
I was in
council.
my senior year at Washington Adventist University. I said, you know what? It would be nice to actually put some of this to
Good news.
to good use. I'm gonna see if I can run for city council, and if we'll see what happens. And then I won. I was like, okay, let's see what let's we'll
Let's see
see what
what
happens.
happens.
But I was a city councilman. The earthquake happened. In fact, I was in the midst of typing my this thesis on the town,
Mm.
and I just remember I remember my mother thought I was jumping up and down upstairs in my room. Type. She was like, "Stop jumping up and down." And I was like, "I'm not jumping up and down." And I'm looking around, and I said, "Oh," I said an expletive, and I said earthquake. I ran out. My older sister's trying to get me. I pushed her out the way. I screamed at her, "Get out the house!" After I got my bearings and stuff straight, I was going around the town checking on people. There was damage to homes, and in fact, there was a gentleman by the name of Sam Horgrove who had a home built. I want to say on either K or J Street in Fairmount Heights. The home is actually over 100 years old. The wall of the home fell off, just fell
Well,
off. The brick, and he was a mason. He was a mason,
Mason.
construction worker,
Okay.
and the one side of the house just like the walls, the brick walls just fell. So
With him inside.
oh no, he's since
Oh.
yeah,
Oh, okay.
but I mean
Oh,
it's a
it's
historic
like
home.
a home.
It's a
Oh,
historic
okay,
home,
okay.
but you saw damage to a lot of
Property.
property. Not that was the most severe. You saw a little bit of damage. Certain people had cracks in foundations that occurred and stuff. Um, I just remember going around the town on foot, checking in on people. Again, this is I even at that age I wasn't driving, so I was on foot,
But that's
going
going
around
around.
talking to people. And again, that was again a scary moment for us, a very
Mm-hmm.
scary moment. But just
Would you say it brought people together really afterwards?
I think to some extent it did. I think a lot of people were, especially a lot of people who were not as well, I say communicative, that were not as cordial or as talkative with neighbors,
Neighbors.
were very more adamant on checking in on them.
Man. Okay.
Yeah.
And also, what about the development of the Metrorail system? Did that play a big impact on Fairmount Heights?
Not to my knowledge, and again,
You are. Yeah.
that would be before my time.
Right.
I will
Right.
say, if anything, it did make things for me
Much
after the
easier.
fact a little bit easier to
Mm.
get around in and around town. Like
Um,
even when I was going to school and I went to Parkdale. Even though I lived in Fairmount Heights, we were being bused to Parkdale when they were still a magnet program. Many many moons ago. We're talking about like 2005. They started phasing it out or so. Um, so you have the metro being used so I can get there, getting to school, getting to work. When even like working for FedEx Field when I was again I do too much. My wife says I even do too much there. But even like as a junior in high school, working at the stadium,
Stadium.
Metro was the easiest.
Available. Mm. So it did play a positive impact.
I would say it did.
Yeah. Okay. So did you participate in any like historical events? At your time,
The
such as the March on Washington and stuff. Like, were you?
the only would I say that no when I was there no I wouldn't say I did. My
Mm.
my, my parents wouldn't even let me
Go.
go to the Million Man March
Oh.
as much as I wanted to. My parents were like you need to go to school. But the funny thing is, my father went without me. He was like, "Oh, I should have brought you." I said,
Send
"Yes,
back
you
you.
should have. You should have." But no, I didn't. I didn't unfortunately participate in anything significant. I think when I was there.
Was there? Okay, so, well, you pretty much answered this question about the community school. With the spelling and the left leaving out of the U. So,
I mean, I can give you a little more. I mean,
more history on the community school.
you had Fairmount Heights School being built about, oh, I'm going to say the 1920, no, 19, not 1920s. after the municipality was established in the 1930s. Oh no, 1912. What am I talking about? It's right here in my notes. 1912, you have the school being established, and then progressively, what has occurred, the number of students got bigger and bigger and bigger. You had the Fairmount Heights School formerly being put on the corner of Sheriff and Addison, and then you had the old Fairmount Heights, which currently sits on 9th Street in Chapel Oaks. All of that all that going into the new Fairmount Heights that's located in Columbia Park, I believe, on Columbia Park Road. All that starting from the small school.
Okay.
And that was a few room school, but that was all grades in that small school.
So, my next question. Okay. Well, I guess you probably answered it. But if there's anything you'd like to share, do you know any significant, faith institution that shaped the history of Fairmount Heights? Would it be the churches that you mentioned?
It would be, in particular, Grace United Methodist, First Baptist of Fairmount Heights, and Sylvan Vista. Um, First Presbyterian did play a role, but again, the church ended up leaving the town and moving into D.C. about 1928. So right before the Great Depression. So, but before then, it still played a vital role in the community.
Community.
Yep.
Okay. So, are there any businesses that existed then, still present today, or still going strong?
Not many.
Not many.
Businesses that it did have a lot of businesses that, I mean, you had hairdressers, shoe repairmen. Of course, you had the architects. You had teachers. You had a few restaurants that were in the town. But since then, many of those businesses have since gone.
Gone. Mm. So, would you say that the businesses is there still a heavy presence of like black-owned business, or
There is.
there is?
Um, there is a few black-owned businesses that are still within the town. One of which is owned by Tommy Boardwater. Now, Tommy Boardwater is I want to say he's a former state senator for that district, and he owns a restaurant still and a dance hall still at on the line on Addison. Is it Addison Road? No, excuse me, Sheriff Road. On Sheriff Road, he still owns his businesses right there. So that's one of the big prominent ones that is still
It's still there.
still there.
Okay. Okay, so just to make it also clear to our listeners, could you mention some of the historical or significant families of the community, like then and probably now today?
The prominent ones that I could think offhand first would be William Sidney Pittman and his wife Portia. They would be one of the big prominent ones. There is a gentleman by the name of Taylor, and I'm trying to remember his first name. Um, but he was actually a judge within the county, one of the first African American judges. On top of that, oh, here he is, James Taylor. He was a Howard University graduate, and he served as an assistant. He was the first African American to serve as an assistant state's attorney for Prince George's County from 1963 to 1966. So he owned a home there, and then after that, in 1969, became a judge with the Seventh Judicial Circuit Court, and that was from 1969 to 1988. Um, Doswell Brooks, um, who actually also was the first African American to be a member of the Board of Education of Prince George's County, and that was in 1956, and he moved into the town around 1928.
Okay. So, just ask you maybe some more personal questions. What was your time like as a council member? Being the youngest.
I think I was the second.
Oh, you're the second.
I feel like there was someone maybe younger than me.
Okay.
One gentleman I think there was one gentleman that was younger than me. It was interesting. Interesting both in a good way and a bad way. Good because it really allowed me to see the town outside of that one block that I lived in. It forced me to actually get out of the comfort zone of the people that you know and really trying to see where people were and what were their true needs in the town. Um, it was very eye opening. Eye opening in the sense that I didn't know everything. It forced me to really not only know people but to advocate for concerns. Um, example I'll use is which is, and I think you'll laugh about this. When I became a city councilman, that was 2011, and I think that was the same year in which the town had attained national status for the National Register. And this was work that was done by previous council members, like Nancy Saxon, who actually deserves a lot of credit for it. But when that occurred, there was a very trying to think of a good word. There was a certain enthusiasm that came about from town members wanting to really take hold about this whole National Register stuff, fixing up historical homes. And the funny thing is, we were trying to work with the state in regards to having someone talk about the grant programs. And who would have thought the person that I ran into was Joni Floyd. Joni Floyd was the person that was overseeing the grant process, and now we work here together at the University of Maryland. So I would say that would be the biggest thing is it's just with that it just created a sense of enthusiasm and like this town has very big significance. We need to really highlight the town, and actually it has taken hold a little bit more. If you go into the town now, you'll see even some homes that have been fixed up. You'll see placards that tell you the history of various homes, placards about the churches, at least with the 3 churches that still exist. Even the old Grace Methodist, they still have their placard there. And then various homes have their placards telling you about the individuals and all that type of stuff.
That's actually really good. So, would you go back to that type of work?
I would be prayerful about going back. The one thing, and I wouldn't say it is a negative thing, but it is a thing that that would concern me is just the amount of energy that was put into it. Again, I was a foolish person foolish in the sense that I did all that stuff at one time. My wife, who was my girlfriend now, said to me, "You're going to give yourself a heart attack if you keep doing this stuff." Because I would remember being in meetings that started at 7 o'clock and would end almost at 11.
Wow. Being a senior writing a thesis.
I was a senior with one class, writing a thesis as a city councilman, thinking about how to pay off loans and getting ready to find a full-time job. Never again. If I did it, I would probably be a retiree.
But would you say the experience opened doors for you?
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I have a better understanding of historical preservation. It actually helped me a lot working in a library, especially understanding the process of communicating and working in collaboration. That it did help me understand. I still like to dabble in politics, but not be in it. I will say from the outset, I also realized that even local politics is not to dissuade anybody from politics. Local politics is cutthroat. I think even more cutthroat than state and national. Because unfortunately, for a lot of people in the local level, you have to sell your soul or sell some of your standards. It's unfortunate, but it's the reality of the beast. You have to kind of you have to let some things slide, or unfortunately you can't really play ball with some of the higher ups.
Mm, that makes a lot
So
of sense.
there's a question in some cases of integrity. Where does your integrity lie?
And are you really ready to deal with circumstances?
Yep. And it's I would be hesitant. I wouldn't say I wouldn't do it, but I would really now would wait until I would be probably a little bit older, a little bit more wiser.
Right. Okay. So one of the questions I really wanted to ask you is about your bachelor's degree in history and American studies. So I am also a history enthusiast, and a lot of the things that young people hear is that what can you do with a history degree? So is there anything you'd like to talk on? So probably our younger listeners, probably want to know what could they do with that type of degree.
I can advocate for being a librarian. I can advocate for being a curator. I can advocate for teaching. I mean, most individuals think it narrows you just to that one thing, but
One thing.
history plays a vital role in industry, in education, what have you, in some form or fashion. And women's history. I mean, all the subcategories: women's history, African American history, Indian history, religious history. They all have their place. Um, so it's really I would say finding what makes you, in regards to the history thing, what makes you want to get up in the morning and you can get the lowest paying job and you still have that passion to do it. Like for me, African American history, religious history, I love. I love politics. Always have. But particularly African American history, particularly if I want to focus, looking into that Jim Crow era going into the civil rights movement. That's that's me. It's fine. My thing is finding that passion of where do you what do you like? I mean, I know probably should be asking you a question, but what do you like and what do you like about history?
I like learning about culture and the people and what drove them to fight. Were they fighting for rights, equality, and stuff to that nature? And I don't like just focusing on one specific group of people. I like looking at it, on a global spectrum and seeing what was happening in different areas, along the same time, and how do they, in some way come together or piggyback from one another.
And how does it make it more relevant into the current time that you're
Time.
living in? But see, that's the thing. You have to find every person, even with the history bug, has to find their niche. Not one niche fits all. So finding that niche, finding what you are passionate about, and really finding something that you can actually highlight. And I'll give you an example. My second this was my second thesis. My first thesis was focused on. I grew up Catholic. Um, my first thesis focused on religious history, mainly the a African American order known as the Josephite Brothers, based out of Baltimore, which was the first order that geared to their mission towards African Americans and Indians, Native Americans, highlighting that history and bringing it to the forefront so people can understand how these individuals play that vital role in the development of not only black parishes like Incarnation in D.C., but various schools um, and such that have come about, that have very played pivotal roles in the community. Stuff like that you want to bring to the forefront. That's You're finding the passion of addressing those issues and bringing it to the attention of people to see what this influence had, especially with the Josephites, on African American Catholicism, not only in the D.C. area but Baltimore and parts of Virginia, even down into the South, where you saw a lot of the prejudices displayed towards African Americans. They were very pivotal in educating African Americans.
I really appreciate that answer because a lot of people they're told that you're only going to go into teaching of history and what you're going to do with that. And it's good to know that there's other things that you can go into with that degree.
I mean,
having the right passion and drive.
I initially thought I would be a lawyer.
A lawyer.
And then I ended up working in a university library. And that was 2005. This is 2019. I've worked in the library from 2005 up till now. I've worked in libraries. And the whole spectrum, academic, research, federal depository library program. It's open doors.
Okay. So, is there anything else you would like to share, maybe about PG County or anything else significant about Fairmount Heights that we probably didn't discuss?
I don't know. I think we kind of hit the bigger portions that I could have thought of. I mean, the town has really come a long way, and I would say even the four municipalities have come a long way from the beginnings. I mean, most of these municipalities didn't have a lot to begin with. They were just giving bare minimum, and you see these are still self-sufficient municipalities that still operate. There are many municipalities that have folded, that have had their charters removed, and the whole process of just getting a charter, it is a difficult process, having to go through ratification through the state legislature. And you're seeing municipalities who did this at the turn of the 20th century. When, remember, Maryland was not the most friendly state to African Americans. They did this. They did these things. So it really is it's a lesson to determination, I feel, of African Americans in a county that has truly changed in a century's time, which was majority rural, majority white, into a very affluent African American community, not only in the state but in the United States.
So you would say it's been a testament to what Black people have been able to, overcome, and
what they have been able to overcome, and hopefully what they will continue to overcome and to excel in the years to come.
Okay. I just want to thank you very much, for sitting down and talking with us, Mr. Aaron Wilson. We really, really appreciate it, and I do hope this wealth of information benefits our listeners. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Okay.